Hey, I've decided to keep a reading diary of Dune so you can get my reactions firsthand as I go through the book. There will be spoilers. So far, I'm really interested in it. There's some things which are jarring, but like in terms of the writing style, there's too many tiny paragraphs. I don't like tiny paragraphs unless they're tiny for a reason. But yeah, in general, like it's interesting. I really like the way it just throws you in from the first page into like this world, and you have a real sense of the world. I just got to this part where there's a receipt, and so I figuring this is the bookmark of the person who donated the book to my workplace, and since it's here, like right at the beginning, as you can see, I guess that she or he just gave up on it that at that early stage. And what's interesting is the bookmark is a receipt for alcohol. So like I don't know, some alcoholic drinks. But I like the idea that like maybe the writing was just that bad that they had to go and buy 2,000 yen worth of alcohol to drown their sorrows and then just get rid of that book. Just get rid of it and put it in some international English learning center where no one's ever going to look at it except for me. I think I know the exact part where they gave up. It's when it says, his wide mouth was twisted into a pleasant sneer. That's the top of page 129, Dune, Frank Herbert. And what the heck is a pleasant sneer? Like, they don't give any explanation for that really weird turn of phrase. Like, a sneer is not pleasant. That's like part of the definition of a sneer, that it's unpleasant. There's no such thing as a pleasant sneer. You mean he smiled? You mean he grinned? Like, what did... I am enjoying this book. I am enjoying, but there's little bits of writing like that they just really grate on me. They just seem like just bad. I'm particularly a fan of the world building. Like the second you start, it just throws in all these words and phrases that don't make much sense. Like, and there's an appendix at the back. So if you want, like you can go and you can look up, oh, this means that, and that name refers to something that happened 100 years ago, which is relevant because of this in entry 5B or whatever. But like when I started reading it, I had this thought like, oh, so I can just, every time there's something I don't know, I just flip to the back of the book, can read it in the appendix, and then I'll get it. And then about 1 second later, I was like, I'm not doing that. So I'm just going to read it and let it wash over me. Let the strange, interesting, unknown vocabulary like immerse me in a world, and that's cool. I can read it that way. Yeah, I'm not gonna read it the in-depth, try and figure out what every reference means in this particular universe kind of way. So, but yeah, this is a fun way to read it as well. So I'd been planning on going out today and doing a film outside, like on the way to a bookshop, but it's raining, so yeah, here I am reading Dune instead and enjoying it a lot. Like I'm really into it now. They've just introduced this character Kynes, I don't know how to say his name. Let's go with Kynes, who's representative of the Empire or the Emperor. And yeah, the sort of the friction between him and the Atreides characters is really fun, and also like yeah, the way they talk to each other, uh like Leto and Kynes, the fact that they come from obviously such different cultures. One of them is a scientist who's been living on Arrakis, this desert planet, and the other one is the leader of this noble house who's just moved there as like as owners or as rulers of Arrakis. So they both have like totally different backgrounds, and the writing just suddenly becomes really good at demarcating these two characters based on their ideas and their attitude towards the world, and also explaining that world to us like in tandem becomes really interesting. So here, this passage. Paul's looking like from they're in like this, what's it called? Not a helicopter, ornithopter, which sounds like a bird helicopter, which like sounds kind of wacky. I can't really imagine it. But anyway, so Paul says he's looking down at the barren world and says, "Are there any plants down there?" "Some," Kind said. This latitude's life zone has mostly what we call minor water stealers, adapted to raiding each other for moisture, gobbling up the trace tube. Some parts of the desert teem with life, but all of it has learned how to survive under these rigors. If you get caught down there, you imitate that life or you die. You mean steal water from each other? Paul asked. The idea outraged him, and his voice betrayed his emotion. It's done, Kyne said, but that wasn't precisely my meaning. You see, my climate demands a special attitude toward water. You are aware of water at all times. You waste nothing that contains moisture. And the Duke thought, my climate. So that's great. Like, it's on the one hand is, like characterizing Kyne's his sort of like protective and also like scholarly attitude, and also the fact that he sees the planet as his place, because he's like a scientist. He's like one of the only like scientists there, it seems, that isn't a native. And so it's like kind of like his petri dish or whatever. But then also, the attitudes of Paul and his dad, the Duke, trying to suss out both the planet and this guy with them, and he also like kind sort of sense of entitlement, to Dune. Like, even though the Duke is like the ruler now of Dune, so they're both, you get this sort of power dynamic going on, and that makes the characters interesting. And also it's sort of done subtly, like just through conversation rather than these big brash kind of arguments that have happened earlier in the book, which I don't always believe. So yeah, just little bits of writing like that keep cropping up now, and in this chapter especially, and so I'm getting really into this book basically. The ecological stuff is so interesting as well. Like, it's the themes of resources, water and spice, the way there's these resources, water on Arrakis and spice in the universe, and the idea of their abundancy being what drives the whole plot. Like, if the big plot is that the baddies want spice production to fail, so that there's not enough spice in the universe, and only the people who've like hoarded up spice will have power over everybody else. So like that idea of a natural resource being in scarcity being what drives power seems super relevant and really interesting and fun to read. And then on Arrakis, where spice is abundant, is water, and that's also like really resonant, because of course like that's more connected to our world, as a natural resource that in some areas is really lacking. So yeah, it's got some really resonant themes about ecological kind of crisis and dependency, and how ecology is related to society and politics. Also, like the Fremen are obviously meant to be Middle Eastern, or like they've got all these Middle Eastern, apart from being like a sort of sand people. I wanted to do quotation marks, but I've got one hand on the phone and one holding the book. But yeah, like kind of desert people, and like having these clothings which are suited to the desert and so on. All their language as well sounds a lot like Arabic in different ways. And yeah, this colonialist stuff is really interesting. It's super like Edward Said kind of stuff going on here. Yeah, I'm loving it. Clients had gone native. And it's another one of those one sentence paragraphs, but in this case I can allow it. So that's just giving me really, what's it called? Not Apocalypse Now. That book, Conrad. Kurtz vibes. It's giving me Kurtz vibes. Oh my god, what's it called? I can only think of Apocalypse Now. What is that book called? The river book. Not Huckleberry Finn. Shit. Oh no, I haven't even read it, but it's one of those river. Heart of Darkness. Yeah, getting some real Heart of Darkness vibes. Just because his name begins with a K, and the guy says, oh, he's been living here so long, he's gone native, and he's an antagonist. That's the only reason. Something else, I'm really enjoying the prophecy thing. That's like one of my favorite ideas so far. I guess I really like the idea that the prophecies are artificially implanted. That's what I'm trying to say. Artificially implanted, like seeds, for political purposes and for like preservation purposes, rather than like just appearing naturally in culture the way that people think that they do. So that's quite interesting. And it's a really clever way to be able to do those tropes of saying, oh, he is the chosen one and so on, but also have us feel like it's not destiny, that the reason he's the chosen one is because people have been planning for it. A certain faction has been planning for it for a long time. It feels like, a political thing, or propaganda kind of thing, rather than this sort of legendary manifest destiny. I like how the really high-tech Fremen suit is described. I don't know, I forget what it's called, but like it's this suit that they wear, which has got they talk about all these gadgets and gizmos it has to like recycle the water that you like get rid of, that you excrete from your body, and then put it back into your body, which is pretty gross, but it's really interesting. And like as the way that they describe this, I like this part. It says, properly suited, your forehead capped tight, all seals in order, your major water loss is through the palms of your hands, Kind said. You can wear suit gloves if you're not using your hands for critical work, but most Fremen in the open desert rub their hands with juice from the leaves of the creosote bush. It inhibits perspiration. So, I don't know, that's really cool. I just like the way they mix this high-tech, future-y, garbage water suit with something like with this gritty image of manual labor and not using gloves and having to rub, and these what are they like? These sort of traditional medicinal techniques of using the creosote bush, of using plants and so on to do things like that. Mix of high tech future, but also just like old school natural remedies. I like. It reminded me of something like Blade Runner, where you've got like this high tech future thing, but like also really gritty, relatable, just day to day life. Also Alien, like that whole thing that Ridley Scott did with movies of like making sci-fi like not about these utopian things with gleaming stainless steel everywhere and like hovercrafts and everything clean. The idea that just because we have good technology doesn't mean that there's still not going to be loads of manual labor and exploitation and shitty jobs and stuff like that. I don't know, that contrast, basically a gritty kind of high-tech future, is really apparent here in this book, and I'm loving it. I really like the descriptions of it. So just finished that chapter, and wow, it really delivered more than I thought it would. So far I've really liked how the chapters are really short, and that most of them are just a few pages long, so you can sort of like you can get like a lot of plot in a tiny bit of space, and it doesn't get boring, and like it's just got a really fast pace, despite the fact that they're mostly talking about politics and stuff like that. But and this one was super long, this chapter that I was talking about, which has the characterization of Leto and Kynes. And yeah, it has the first sandworm, which is what I was waiting for. Yay! I fucking love sandworms. Like, I'm really excited. I was waiting. And yeah, it was really cool. You don't actually see the worm, but all the descriptions of like the spice factory, which like the crawler, and then the little flying ornithopters, which are like, people-sized almost, like I guess like helicopters next to it. And Paul describes them as gnats next to like this magnificent warrior beetle. So all that language is entomological, and it's all like kind of gearing you up for this big worm thing coming. And I like all the insect similes. They're cool and nice, and I want more of them. I want more insects. I want this book to be about giant insects fighting each other. You can keep all the politics and all the ecological resource stuff. Yeah, that's great. But more giant insect similes, please. Looking forward to that. I found this pretty little river on the way to a friend's house where I was going to deliver tandoori chicken. Yeah, making tandoori chicken is like my thing these days. And of course it could only be like just a brief delivery visit and no more, but it was still nice to get out of the house, go for a walk, and see a face, even though just briefly. I've reached the flowers I compressed here earlier, just as Paul and Jessica are escaping the sandstorm in their thopter.
Black Lives Matter! 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 Black Lives Matter!
I've made it to part 2 called Muad'Dib, and yeah, things are really picking up. the end of part one, we see Paul finally become an interesting character. Finally, like, and it makes sense why it took this long, and because of things in the plot that raised the stakes, and Paul and Jessica, to a lesser extent Jessica, like their characters kind of reach a heightened state. Like the tensions that were there are all heightened, and to give an example, like at the beginning, Paul is saying things like he has a terrible sense of purpose, a terrible sense of purpose. But it just like the text just tells you that you don't really feel it. Whereas at the end of the first part, you really get into his head, and you really get that teenagey kind of feeling of this young man like having a sense of his self-importance, and also the way he's so disrespectful towards his mother. Like he's really mean to her, and like looks down on her, and he's just a douche. And I like that because it makes him more realistic, it makes him more interesting and flawed as a character. And yeah, it feels like just more interesting and to read, and I want to read it specifically about Paul now, whereas for the whole first part I couldn't care less about him. So that's good. It's getting better, it's getting more exciting, and I'm excited to see what the next parts are going to be like. This park is part of the old castle moat, and it's an 8-minute walk from my front door, and I go here a lot. It's very grey these days because we're still in the middle of the rainy season, so it's also quite humid, but you can still see plenty of wildlife and things like this guy snooping around. Okay, so a lot has happened. Most importantly is that Kynes is dead. I'm not okay with that. I was actually genuinely sad when it happened. Like, I remember that the chapter ended and I was in bed and I just said shit, like really loudly, because yeah, I hadn't realized it. And I mean, in the chapter, he's slowly dying in the desert, but I don't know why. I just thought he'd be fine. It was only like in the last few pages where I was like, oh no, they really could kill him off, couldn't they? And they did. And it was surprising because I didn't expect that I would become emotionally involved with the plot to this extent, first of all, given the way the story's going. But also, I guess, I don't know, like, it was just disappointing because there's no other character that I'm so interested in, that I'm as interested in as Kynes. So we'll have to see where it goes. I will say that Paul and Jessica have become more interesting, and I'm glad because they're the main characters, so they'd have to. But yeah, like as it's gone on, there's the tension between them, and especially like when they reach the Fremen and Jessica seems to realize that she's expendable, like that Paul really is the main character and that like she doesn't need to be there, and that kind of creates an interesting tension in her character. And the whole mother-son dynamic is just an interesting thing that you don't really see in fiction, like at least in this kind of fiction, I think. So that's it. It's definitely picked up in that sense. Like, but still, no one can beat Kynes. The reason Kynes was so good was because, like, while he has a political purpose, like all the characters, he's belongs to the empire, like he represents the like imperial forces or whatever. Still, like, even though they've all got their little like kind of place on the political chessboard, he doesn't really care about any of that. He doesn't care about the overarching plot of the novel. He's just cares about the planet and about like ecology, and because he's a scientist and he's a planetologist, and like it just makes sense that not everybody would be super involved in the plot of Dune just because they happen to be a character in it. So he's kind of realistic in that sense. And also, it's always interesting having a character who's not obviously a good guy or a bad guy. And then, like, yeah, especially like in the very last chapter, in that last chapter where he dies, they make him so much more interesting as well by having him hallucinate his father. And so, like even as they're killing off the character, they're creating this depth, which is really interesting. I say they, maybe because I'm used to talking about movies. It should be he, Frank Herbert, the writer. But anyway, so yeah, I'm enjoying it, but I'm worried because I don't see how the other characters can really fill Kynes' shoes. But we'll see. It's getting late, but I'm gonna have another read and see how far I can get in it. I think I'm on the last stretch now, so we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll do one more of these videos before I make my review. At this point, I think it's clear that I found it more pleasurable to trudge through these trees, which I've seen countless times before, than to trudge through the last 200 pages or so of Dune, which has just gone on too long, basically. Finished Dune and cut my hair, as you can see. First time ever that I've done it in my life, so I'm kind of happy with myself, the way it's turned out. It's a bit messed up at the back, but I'm going to go see a friend later, and hopefully she can even it out a bit. But yeah, Dune, man, like, I cannot remember the last time I had such mixed feelings about a book. Seriously, it's like, I kind of given up on it. It had become such a slog towards the end. I was just like, just finish this thing, just finish it, get through, nearly there. You know, I was counting the pages, and then suddenly, just the last few chapters, everything became exciting. All the sort of the themes were coming back, and they were being tied up in interesting like plot developments, and unexpected stuff was happening, and it was just what a great ending. And then I read the appendices, and the appendices were, some of them were like kind of, you know, they fill out the history and stuff, which the book only hints at, in a sort of, you know, like in Lord of the Rings as well. Like, but like in Lord of the Rings, I remember the appendices were sort of just like, oh, kind of fun, and oh yeah, but when I'm reading this one, it was like, oh yeah, that makes this make more sense, and like it really fleshed out the story a lot, reading the appendices. And reading them was actually kind of more fun than reading the book in a lot of places. But anyway, I will make a review, maybe a few reviews. I have so much to say about Dune, even though I kind of hated lots of parts of it. I just loved other parts so much as well. So, you know, lots of thoughts. For the next book, it was going to be either The Hunger Games or the Lincoln in the Bardo. Those were the two that I was like kind of like had in my head that one of those is going to be the next one I read. But yeah, because of like, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement going on right now and stuff, like I really wanted to like just skip to one of the black writers that I had on my list. So I looked around, and I don't have anything physical. I have like two ebooks. Well, I had one ebook, Dawn, by Octavia Butler. But you know, I just finished Dune, which is this massive sci-fi, and Dawn is also this big sci-fi, which has been, you know, like on my list for so long, and I want to read it, but I just don't want a big sci-fi right now. And the other one that I found on the internet, on the Gutenberg project, was Passing, which was on my list of things to read. So I just started Passing, and so far it's really exciting and good. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'm really looking forward to putting together my thoughts on Dune in a more comprehensive format. So yeah, stick around if you want to see that. See you.